Three Men in a Bible, exploring the Sunday Scriptures. Join Father Panagiotis Boznos, Father Nick Lionas, and Stephen Christoforou for their weekly Orthodox Christian Bible study. They are three friends who hang out every week and explore the Sunday Gospel and Epistle readings.
Got it.
I was given the option to leave the meeting. Thought about
We've landed on the moon. It's just a complete throwaway joke.
It really is. And then that's it. That's all there is said about that.
Yeah. There's literally nothing else mentioned ever again.
But you learned something that day.
You did.
What, that we landed on the moon?
Apparently.
What if I already knew that? Then I didn't learn anything at all. Oh, I'm in the wrong view here. There we go. Now I can see all three of you. Good.
Is it worth it?
Well, you're talking the most, so yes. Just kidding. But you were talking about I thought you were going to lead into more of your love for that movie. You're gonna stop there.
I was just going to start and end with, a one-off joke, much like in that movie itself.
Oh, she meant 10 o'clock at night.
Oh.
I'm impressed. I haven't seen that in a long time.
You haven't seen that in a long time? Oh, man. Pretty much anytime it's on TV, I'll watch it. There are like a few movies that no matter what else is on TV, with the exception of like an Oklahoma game, if it's on, I'll watch it. And that's one of them.
So what's on the rest of the list? I feel like this is a very Father Nick Lionas question. What's your list of eminently TV rewatchable movies? Top 5.
Shawshank.
Absolutely.
It's always on.
Absolutely.
I mean, A Christmas Story, just because you got it. Like, I've never, I would say in the last 10 years, I haven't watched A Christmas Story straight through, but I've definitely watched the full movie.
I would say Home
every
Alone.
Year. Home Alone.
Yeah.
Home Alone's on there. So we got Dumb and Dumber, Shawshank, Home Alone. I'll keep A Christmas Story there. Pretty Woman.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Surprising.
Pretty Woman. Really? That's not something I think. I mean, like that's not something I would tell you guys, much less the entire anyone who's watching this. You can't take that back now. Can we edit this out of for my friend's sake? Can we edit this out of the podcast?
The great story of redemption and repentance. You want to be
Richard Gere?
I didn't say Runaway Bride. I mean, it could have been worse. It could have been a lot worse. Just got to keep it in the Julia Roberts, family as well.
Gosh. If you're gonna go Richard Gere, you got to go First Night. That's the only acceptable Richard Gere movie.
Oh my God, that's a terrible movie.
It's so bad. It's so bad. It's so bad. But Connery's in it, so
I know Sean Connery. He's made some really bad choices in his.
Oh, he's in terrible movies.
Yeah,
Paycheck is a heck of a thing.
but so is Christopher.
Avengers.
Walken.
Remember? Did you watch Avengers? Like not the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but like the British Avengers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Is that with Uma Thurman?
Oh, Uma Thurman and
yeah. Ralph. That's not Ralph
Fiennes. Yeah,
Ralph Fiennes. Is it? Oh man, that was a terrible movie. Yeah. Bad.
But
The Man Who Would Be King was
Finding Forrester, great movie.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like
Untouchables, not a good movie.
No, not a good movie. But
I mean, like, a good movie. They gave him an honorary Oscar for that.
Yeah, but
yeah, it's really not a good movie. I loved it when I was a kid, when I was younger, and Connery's actually pretty cool in that. We watched it on TV, so everything was edited.
Yeah,
that's the other thing that I'm finding. Like, there's certain movies that I'm showing that I want to show Scotty, and then I like throw them on Netflix or something like that, like Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, I was like, oh, we could watch this movie, it wouldn't be a problem. There is so much claymation gore that
there's a lot of that.
I was like within 5 minutes, I'm like, nope, can't watch that. But I didn't realize it because I used to always watch it on like, TBS or something. Yeah. Yeah. So there's so much that was edited growing up that now I didn't realize that's part of the movie. I never actually watched half the movies I've seen in my life. I've missed like chunks of it because they've been edited.
Because you saw the fit for broadcast version.
The best edited movie, I think.
Any of the Die Hards. Any of the not even the first one. I want to say the worst editing has to be the second one.
Oh, it's so
the airport
bad.
one.
I mean, it's just a bad movie.
The dubbing,
it's just
the
bad
dubbing
movie,
is so bad.
But the dubbing over the profanity in Die Hard 2 is so bad.
Oh, I'm glad. That's hilarious that you said the same thing. 1, 2, 3, go. Did we just become best friends?
Yep.
Oh boy. All right. So perhaps
since we're now in the holiday season and we just finished talking about Die Hard, this seems like a nice segue.
Not a Christmas movie, but yeah, sure.
False, and you know it.
Yeah, I'm just throwing a grenade in this conversation. I'm just kidding. Of course, it's not a Christmas movie.
He scrawls "ho ho ho" on the chest of one of the terrorists. Of course, it's
who's wearing a Santa hat.
Mm-hmm.
And the tape he uses at the end of the movie, it's not just duct tape.
It's festive
holiday.
duct tape.
It's holiday duct tape.
They are at a Christmas party. All right.
Yeah.
All right. I'll stop fighting this one because
her name is Holly. Hello.
What's her name? Okay. All right. Well, I'm not really arguing this. I was just kidding.
Okay. Sorry. You've lost the entire segment of our viewers and gained.
All right.
This is why people come to 3 Men in a Bible.
This is not
for the questions, the hard questions.
Right. Okay.
All right. Shall we get into things?
Let us. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Shine within our hearts, living Master, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open our eyes to understand the teachings of your gospel. And instill in us also reverence for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual way of life, both thinking and doing those things that are pleasing to you. Through Christ our God, the light of our souls and bodies, and to you ascribe glory, together with your beginningless Father, your all holy, good, and life-creating Spirit, now and forever, into the ages of ages.
Amen.
The reading is from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians. This is Galatians 5:22 through 6:2. Brethren, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. Let us have no self-conceit, no provoking of one another, no envy of one another. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Look to yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Amen.
Amen. So we're in Galatians. We're once again not in the normal cycle, right? Which is worth saying out loud. This reading is connected to the saint that we celebrate on Sunday, who is Saint Sabbas the Sanctified. Is that the 5th? Yeah.
Yes.
So
what's on the 6th?
Says Father Nicholas.
What is on the 6th?
It's a Monday this year.
It's a Monday. What's on the 4th?
Saturday. Vespers.
True answer.
Saint Barbara, Saint John of Damascus. Two of my favorites.
I forgot about Saint John. I always forget about Saint John.
Saint John of Damascus was a monk at the Marsaba monastery, which was founded by Saint Saba, whose reading we are reading.
And we're back.
For the
5th.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is not the first time we're in Galatians. We've covered a basic introduction to Galatians before, so we don't need to spend too much time on that, but we can see again, if you go back to that episode when we talked about this, St. Paul criticizing the people of Galatia who are kind of undergoing a Judaizing of their Christianity, right, and are turning back towards Mosaic law and practices in the presence of what are called Judaizing forces or apostles, or the super apostles, the preeminent of the apostles that we talked about. So you do see a flash of that here when he says, against such there is no law. He's talking about the law, that these things are not prohibited, right? So these are the fruit of the Spirit, and he will, prior to this, talk a little bit about some things that should be prohibited. But again, here he's talking about kind of natural law. So you see that theme carried over. But for the majority of this reading really, in context, is the end of the previous paragraph, and the two are taken together in a literary sense. Like, it's reading them separately is something that the church does for the feast day of holy ascetics like Saint Sabbas, so monks of the church who have been glorified as saints. So this reading will be read during any liturgy or any feast day of a monastic saint.
Yeah, just like if you remember from the Sunday when we celebrated the Apostle Philip, there was kind of the apostle reading, which comes up. So same thing. Right.
So with that, I actually think that it'd be beneficial for us to go back a few verses to start reading the previous paragraph, and then I'll read this again, but just so we can see how the two work together and how we can see that in a larger context of what St. Paul is writing about, how this fits within his larger narrative, and then we can talk about applying it to monastics specifically. So I'm going to jump back to verse 19. So this is about 3 verses previously.
Yeah, still in chapter 5.
Still in chapter 5, verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousy, outbursts of wrath, self-ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I also told you in the time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. And then it continues on with the rest of it. So you can see how he lists out here the spirit of, or the fruit of the Spirit. And just previously, he lists out the work of the flesh, and the two are contrast one another.
Yeah. I also love, by the way, with his list of the flesh, he doesn't sort of like have a final list. He gives this very long list, right? Longer than the fruit of the Spirit. And then also says and the like I can keep going, but I'm not going to.
And other things.
Yeah.
Etc.
But that's an interesting sort of thing right off the back, right? Why is it that he uses sort of that different word with each of these lists? That he talks about the fruit of the Spirit versus the works of the flesh. Although maybe we even need to start with like, what does flesh mean in this context before maybe we get to that?
Sure. What does flesh mean?
Yeah. Sometimes I think this is why, interpretation and context matters. I think sometimes some Christians can kind of fall into I was going to say unintentional, but maybe not unintentional, like dualism, where we look at sort of spiritual things as good and physical things as bad, right? And I think somebody without any context could look at this and see like, oh, flesh means body, right? Body bad, soul good. But the way that Paul talks about this, and he uses sort of different words in different places, right? Like when he uses the word that we translate as flesh, he's talking more about the sort of broken human nature that we're talking about, right? The humanity subject to the passions, humanity subject to these things that sort of lead us into sin and away from God. Not the body as such, but the body that needs healing, right? Humanity that needs healing. Because elsewhere he will use words like body, right? And body means one thing in that context. Flesh means something different.
Yes, but it is the things that are not godly, like things that do not come from God. These are things that do not come from God in this case. It's not so much the flesh, like you said, that is like because the Gnostics and stuff, they were very much like that dualism, right? And the things that are earthly are all bad. But the earthly things, the reason why that's important to point out that that's not the case here is that these things are bodies and these things all come from God too. Right. That's why what we're saying here about the flesh not meaning just, the body here, it's kind of, in this case, the flesh being the overcome aspect of our broken humanity, overcome by sin, overcome by the fallen world of our humanity, that aspect of our humanity, things that we've allowed to work itself into a non-godliness living, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And is the thing that Paul says a few verses later needs to be crucified, right? Like that is the thing that needs to be sort of put to death and put to side. It's not that we have to shake off this mortal coil. It's not the body itself or physicality itself that's the bad thing, but it's the flesh with its passions and desires. Like that is the thing that needs to be crucified, as Paul says a few verses later.
Mm-hmm.
So the helpful way to think about this is to think about the fall, and to think about Adam and Eve being created as physical beings, but then after their expulsion, or prior to their expulsion, after their fall, the scriptures say that God creates, garments of skin for them, right? And the artistic interpretation of this, right, you see them wearing like animal furs, right? And that's typically how we can conceptualize them. But the patristic understanding is, no, their physical nature changed from being physical matter in the presence of God, which therefore is filled with the grace of God, to once they separated themselves from God, their physical nature lost that grace. And so the very physicality that they have is corrupted and their bodies become fleshly. And in Christ, with the resurrection of his body and the entirety of human nature, for Christians, the flesh has been crucified, the flesh has been overcome, and we once again possess grace-filled bodies, right? In other places, he will talk about like our spiritual body, and that there's a fundamental difference between the physicality of a baptized, grace-filled Christian and someone who is living according to the flesh.
Yeah, which is why, and this leads me on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's kind of a fun story that's worth seeing. Like, this is why we have relics, for example, right? And why the bodies of, the physical bodies of saints are in some instances like incorrupt, right? Because the body itself is not a bad thing.
Right.
Just a fun little story that I came across recently. Our mutual friend and classmate, Father Alexei Petrides, spent a few days on Mount Athos recently. And he was there. He saw the relics of one of the monks that I knew in my travels there, Father Galaction, who always used to be known as like standing during the services, despite his old age. So, after a few years in the tomb, they collected his relics to put him in the ossuary, and they found that his feet were incorrupt because he always used to sort of like stand in service despite his old age. That's like this sweet little offering that he gave, and his feet are incorrupt. And, I think, you think about things like this, right? The body's not a bad thing, and God certainly honors the body.
So could it be argued that this flesh is a connotation to death, that when humanity was sent out of the garden and they were given that flesh bodies, that there's a connection with death in that? Is that, and then sure. These and then these spirit these works of works of the flesh is basically works of what bring on death, right? so then you have these and are also the result of the fall, or not even necessarily the result of, would you say result of the fall, or result of taking from the tree of not good knowledge of good and evil, not being prepared as like not with by because of like, I mean, like enter the world, hatred, contentions, jealousy, fornication, uncleanliness, lewdness. Is that a enter the world with the knowledge of those things, and then the act of those things are the flesh? That I feel like I'm complicating this way too much. I guess what I'm trying to say is this is the result of the fall. There you go.
Yeah, that was thank you. They're very succinct. I really appreciate how you just got that out in one sentence, very clear. The works of the flesh are the result of the fall.
Yeah.
I had to get there.
It's our brokenness. Yeah, it's totally our brokenness.
Yeah,
okay. And that's why and I think that's very apparent when
your inability to articulate that in one quick sentence is a result of the fall.
However, I arrived there.
Right.
So
in the kingdom, there are no run-on sentences. Yes.
That's run-on sentences, babbling. Okay.
Grammar.
Long lectures where you want to fall asleep. Not in the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good to know. That is not. We should add this. And the like. That goes under and the like.
And the like.
Yeah.
Yes. Etc. does a lot of work in that passage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's again, that's part of our brokenness, right? And like you think about the contrast between adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, etc., with love, joy, peace, long suffering, etc. Right? I mean, that is the difference between the broken humanity and deified humanity.
Right. The works of the flesh lead to Father Nick's point, right? They're a result of the fall, but they lead to death. Right? They lead to further separation with God and with mankind. They lead to further corruption, right? So the ill flesh continues to work and perpetuate its own illness unless it is sanctified and healed through the grace of baptism.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of physicality, right? But there's also we have to understand that not only was our physical self corrupted in the fall, but right, even our spiritual self. Like we incline not to just to physical acts of the flesh, right? But fleshliness is not only material. That's another like an important thing to speak about, right? Fleshliness is pulling away from life, right? Because the when you think about the difference between a body and flesh, like flesh is lifeless.
Yeah.
Right. But a body is vivified, right? That's the distinction between the two. Full of the spirit, right? So in this sense, fleshliness is not, only located within physical matter. Like fleshliness can also be our spiritual disposition,
which the list actually underscores, right? Because if you look back at the list, right, it says hatred, which is not necessarily like a physical thing, right? Jealousy, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, right? These are not like
envy. Yeah.
Right. So and that's interesting, right? So in the same way that, sin is not purely like a material thing. Deification is not purely a spiritual thing, because like kindness, right? Like gentleness, these are things that are also sort of expressed with our bodies in the way that we treat our neighbor. So I think we have to sort of get over that potential unintentional division between the sort of the spirit and the body.
Right. And this brings us, to we've kind of set the pace with going through the works of the flesh, but to bring it back into this reading itself, what we have for this Sunday and for all the feasts of the ascetic saints, the key to me, maybe more so than the list of the fruits, is that next line, right? Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. And we've talked before in the past about how the morality of Christ's teaching is just the natural outpouring of life in the kingdom, in God's presence, right? In the same way that the fruits of the Spirit don't precede the Spirit, right? They are the fruit of the Spirit. And so oftentimes we can try and work backwards, like cultivating the fruit without the Spirit. You see that? Like, we can look at this list and be like, oh, well, if only, if I'm loving and joyful and peaceful, then like I have the Spirit, or, it's a good, like, I don't know how to put it. Maybe I'm falling into Father Nick's trap. But I've just like totally, now I'm going to ruin it. Now God's going to come back at me. And
no, but I think that this is a good thing, right? And this maybe gets to the distinction that Christoforou talks a little bit about, like, why is it that Paul uses the word fruit in terms of these good things that come from the Spirit, and the use of the word work, right? That first of all, I think there's that connection to life, right? Fruit, like you sort of implied earlier, is this thing that is life, right? These are these things that grow out of the presence of the Spirit.
Right.
But it's also kind of a humbling thing for us that it is not our work, right? Love is not a thing that sort of we do. Joy is not a thing that we do. Like, there is this indwelling of the Spirit, which then changes who we are and sort of grows out of us, right? As we allow ourselves to be the agents of God in this world, so to speak. But the word works is the word that he's using for all of these, like, things of the flesh, the brokenness, because like we are the source of our adulteries and our fornications and our uncleanness and so forth. And when we put the cart before the horse, right? There are certain heresies that the church has articulated in the past, right? In terms of like our sense that we can earn our way into salvation, right? Or we sort of earn our way to like God's presence, as opposed to God is the prime mover in these sense, right? We love him as he loved us first. And it is his presence within us, to whatever extent, right, that allows us to actually be loving and peaceful and so forth.
And I think just to kind of drive this home and harp on it a little bit more, we need to understand the synergy that is in play between God and us in our own salvation, right? Because there is freedom, and by freedom, then we are called to participate, right? So we cultivate that which God gives us, right? And by cultivating it, it increases through his grace, and right, there is this co-working between God and man and mankind, right? But, and this is the important part, is like, it always starts or originates with God, not with us, right? So that's where I was getting, like, when we are blessed with the Spirit, then we can show love, joy, and peace. And it's, to your point, Steve, it's not our love and joy and peace that we're showing. It's actually us participating and expressing God's love and peace in the same way that St. Paul, we've used this time and time again, right? It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. When I am actually shining forth God's presence and Spirit within my life, I'm participating in his life. I'm being grafted onto him. I'm not assuming him into me and like I'm primary.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like I do these works are my fruit. Right. These are the fruit of the Spirit. They're not my fruit, in fact. And I participate in them. I share in them. I co-produce them, but they originate with God, who is Spirit, and has blessed me with that. Father Nick, you want to speak?
Yeah, and I'm kind of doing that on purpose because I think it's kind of funny. You want to go? You had a lot of wonderful things to say there, but is it possible? No, okay. Actually, let me before I go on a rambling spree.
Yeah. Do you take some time? You think about what you want to say, and then you got it.
I've been thinking about it the last like 20 minutes while you're talking.
I say that to Zacchaeus all the time. I'm like, stop, think about what you want to say, and then say it.
That's because every sentence with our kids start with, "So at school today? So at school today? So at school today?" Anyway, that's how I get it through sentences. Stop, think. Anyway, if someone is struggling with some of these works of the flesh, we're struggling through them. or rather, if the fruits of the Spirit are exposed, they're put forth by someone you can see the fruit of the Spirit working through somebody. Does that mean that they have conquered, if you will, the works of the flesh? Can someone still be working through or struggling with the works of the flesh and still show forth the fruits of the Spirit?
Yeah, I think we get to the point where it's not a linear process. Right? You talk about, just to take example, if we're going to talk about crucifying the flesh, right? I'm going to jump right to the ladder, right? When St. John talks about the ladder and this ascent towards God, I mean, he's very clear. You can be on multiple steps at the same time. It's not like once I conquered this, then I move on to the next one, and then I move on to the next one. Like, I might be struggling with one of the most basic steps at the bottom of the rung, but also, working on something well above it, right? So the ladder in that image it's not a straight progression. And that's just the most common, present image that we have in the Orthodox Church for the spiritual ascent. But it's very much peaks and valleys, and it's very much, simultaneously excelling in one area, in one fruit, if for lack of a better term, and struggling with another work of the flesh. So we shouldn't look at it as this linear progression that, like, because I've been baptized, right? Theoretically, everybody who's been baptized should have already, like, the flesh, it's done. It's been crucified, right? Like, it has been, it's done. But at the same point in time, you still have to actualize it, right? And so St. Maximus talks about this. I think St. Mark the Ascetic talks about, maybe Peter of Damascus talks about it as well, right? There's this we receive the fullness of the Spirit at our baptism, but then through the ascetic practices of the church, we actualize or realize the fullness of that, right? It's not as if something new is added to us. It's not as if we're lacking in God's grace, as if the sacraments of initiation and the sacraments that we receive are somehow flawed. It's we get in the way of shining them forth in their fullest extent. So in that sense, like, there's ups and downs, and you can be very kind, but also, like, idolatrous.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, right, and I can't remember who would have said this, but I think one of the potential reasons for that is for our own humility and salvation in the midst of all of that. Right? That sometimes being a Christian means kind of like struggling with the two of them, and realizing the more that I still struggle with, adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, whatever it is, the more that sort of grounds me to realize, okay, what is the source of my love, joy, peace, etc. And so these become kind of like thorns in the flesh, right? To use like some other sort of Pauline language to remind us, like, okay, you're doing these wonderful things, but you're still a terrible faster, or you're still have a very sharp tongue, or whatever it is. Like, which
even if you didn't, I mean, not to say if you didn't, like, okay, you conquer, because we pray to conquer our sinful desires. That's one of the part of the prayer that you say that I really harp on in my head. But if we have struggles, if we're struggling, and you have to continue to struggle. You can't say, oh, this is the thorn in the flesh, or the God's not taking it away. You have to continue to struggle with these things. We have the opportunity, like you said, the result of that is a little bit of some humility, but that's only because if I don't have some of that stuff, then I fall into the very other sin of just being prideful. I mean, and there you are, still sinning in just a different way, a new way, and that's not helpful. And then you'll lose, So I don't know. I guess
the other thing is when we look at the lives of the saints, and especially, and I think this is why this reading is so important when we look at the monastic saints, because they dedicate their life to the ascetic practices in not a way that's separate from the calling for every Orthodox Christian, because we are all called to asceticism, but in a way that is more direct, for lack of a better, more. But the more you cultivate the Spirit, the more you witness your flesh. Right? Like this is a very clear tenet of the spiritual discipline of the church, is like, the more you get to know God, the more you see your own distance from him. The closer you get to him, the more you realize how far away you are from him. The more you are shining forth love and kindness, the more you realize the moments when you don't. Right? If you haven't actually cultivated a heart of peacefulness, then you won't notice the fact that, like, you're a jerk. Right? If you're just a jerk all the time,
Well,
you were not going to see how big of a jerk you are.
Right.
But the more that you are able to shine forth with God's peace, the more you see, at least in the past or in the moment, where I'm tempted to works of the flesh. Yeah. Right. And that's why the saints of the church, like, that's their humility. Their humility is not false, and it's not for show. Their humility is they are so truly shining forth with the fruit of the Spirit that anything falling short of the fullness of that, they see and they experience, and they know that it is, the continued work of the flesh that still needs to be healed. And, the beauty of our salvation is that it is this asymptotal trajectory, right? Like,
right.
Math for those.
I had to think about this. It's been a long time since. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I use it all the time. I've got a bunch of yeah.
But just so I'm processing what you're saying. There's a level of self-awareness that God's light shines on you when you get closer to him.
Yes.
And self-awareness also doesn't always feel good to you, but that self-awareness also has a greater impact on the world around you, I would imagine, too, though. Right?
Because you're more able to address it.
Right. Huh. Okay. Interesting.
You're welcome.
Yeah. No, it's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple image to maybe make this concrete, right? If God is light and you're sort of in a dark room, the closer that you draw to that light, the more you can see about yourself, right? Very simple sort of thing. But you see the stain on your shirt, which you couldn't see when you were in the darkness,
or the gangrene I have in my heart.
Yeah. But the closer you get to that light, right, the more you actually see sort of finer things, like a fraying in the fabric, right, as opposed to a giant splotch of mustard or whatever it is. Which is the reason why, like, a Saint Sassouis, right, who's I kind of always have next to me here, like, the last thing that he says as he was passing away, like, elder, give us a word. He's like, oh, I wish I have not yet begun to repent. And, like, this is a guy who's literally, his face is shining with the uncreated light of Christ as he's sort of lamenting the fact that he has not yet begun to repent, because his vision is so clear that he sees, like, the connection, to use that sort of asymptote, right, that relation between the finite and the infinite. Like, I am still this finite, flawed thing that I'm measuring myself against the beauty and the infinite goodness of the Lord. Like, oh man, I still fall short. And he was shining.
So what would you say to someone who would argue that it's better to be ignorant?
You're still dirty. You still got mustard all over you.
You just don't see it.
You just don't see it.
Well,
and the reality is, right, to Steve's point, right, the reality is there, when Christ returns and establishes his kingdom, right, when we read about judgment, there is no more darkness at that point. Everything, like, everything, you can't hide anything.
It's
everything
exposed.
will be laid bare, right? Everything will be seen, right? So the reality is, fine if you want to, but like, for now, we're talking about, if you're lucky, a couple decades, right? You get a couple of decades, maybe 10 if you're really lucky. We're talking about eternity, right? Yeah, you want to have ignorance and live without the knowledge of truth, or the acknowledgement of truth, that's only going to be for a short period of time. And then there will be eternity where truth is laid bare, and that's it.
Yeah. Because I'll say this about that, right? There is the ignorance that we sort of are in, right, by virtue of just things that are outside of our control, right? And the ignorance that we can choose to sort of, plug up our ears and close our eyes,
ignorance, yeah.
Right? And I think the thing about like the former form of ignorance, right? Like this conversation is bringing to mind the sort of pastoral exhortation that Paul has towards the end of this reading, right? Where he says, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, right? If Paul is calling people to be gentle with the limitations that we have, maybe the things that we don't know, whatever it is, like the Lord is in his own way is going to be gentle with us for the things that we, the ways that we fall short and so forth. But if it's not like if it's a willful sort of ignorance, if we're closing our eyes because we want a better deal, when that's a different story. I think it's like there's that tension between like the Lord is merciful. Paul is calling Christians to be merciful in this, but we also like can't exploit that mercy. Like that's not going to go well for us either.
Yeah. But also you need to be clear, like their mercy is expressed in correction.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's like, okay, maybe you don't like blind them with the light right away, like that fullness, but you also don't allow them to continue in darkness.
Yes.
Some level of illumination is required of those by those in the spirit, or of those in the spirit.
Because the key word there is restore, right? Mm-hmm. You should restore them in a spirit of gentleness, and closing our eyes to and avoiding a tough conversation and avoiding that correction doesn't restore anybody. It sort of maintains them in the brokenness and the filth that they find themselves in.
Right.
And right, to use that sort of like the jerk sort of language, right? Being a jerk to somebody for the sake of, proving your own spirituality is also not restoring them either, right? Like we have to be very careful to walk this road.
And right, to what Father Nick was saying before, also when it says lest you be tempted, right here we're talking about pride as well. Right. So when someone is overtaken in a trespass, those who have the ability to correct them gently without the pride of being puffed up for correcting someone and bringing someone to restoration, those are the ones who are required to do this, right? If we can't do that, if we can't correct without pride, if we can't correct without gentleness, then that's it.
Yeah.
Father Nick, you look like you have thoughts.
I wanted to give him space. There was that eyebrow raise, that rock-esque eyebrow raise.
I have thoughts. Yeah. I'm just trying to find where it says, do not be tempted, because I want to just correct them. Was that?
6.
Yeah, 6:1, right?
6:1, end of 6:1.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm trying to find it in chapter 5. Because
as we said before, these chapter the divides, like they weren't there in the original, right? So sometimes when the church gives you like these readings, they straddle like otherwise artificial boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
But I watched the History Channel thing about the biblical code. I don't know if anybody saw that. You see with the matrices and everything, with the embedded code in the scriptures. No.
Right.
The weird numerology. Yeah.
Aliens.
Okay, so let's get to this part where you if anyone's overtaken by trespass, you who are spiritual restore them with the spirit of gentleness. And this, by the way, here seems a little more gentle in terms of his approach to speaking to the Galatians than his previous approaches. And not that he wasn't gentle, but he was a little more forceful with the Corinthians.
But even the way he starts his letter to them, right?
Yeah, this letter to the Galatians, he's pretty.
It's not.
I'm not even going to say hello. I'm going to say I'm disappointed with y'all.
I can't believe you guys have returned to your former ways. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also,
That's
hello.
True. Yes. Also, hello. Oh, by the way, that's how that's how.
But this is This is his gentle side.
This is. So you have this consider the spirit of gentleness, considering yourself lest you be tempted. So he's not speaking about walking into a conversation with somebody who's struggling with whatever, and you are trying to expose that intervention, if you will, but like you're trying to help them through this. He's not speaking that like you fall into their temptation. He's speaking that you don't fall into a level of pride, because and in falling into that pride, you also lose your gentleness, I imagine. I'm not one of you. I can't, that now you lose that connection. And I think as a priest, we I think that compassion and connection with people that come to us makes us, I want to say, more effective, because but we're kind of in that vein, that we do it gently, that we speak with everyone gently, who's struggling with certain things, because that connection that we have with them so that they can get better is a necessary part of not being prideful. Like it's not going to be helpful if they can't connect to me as a priest, because I am clearly not dealing with their issues, which, God willing, like I can be a level of example. But like when you have that pride, you kind of build a wall between you and the person that you're trying to restore. I should just speak in one sentence.
Just give us the TLDR.
Why don't you turn your mic off, talk for like 2 minutes, and then we'll unmute you.
Work through it for a little bit. Man, geez. Yeah.
Love a journaling exercise.
Yeah. No, but Father, next to your point, yes, it's not, when he's talking about lest you be tempted, it's not that like, I'm thinking of there are stories from the desert fathers and desert mothers where I can't remember which mother of the desert it was. But there was a young woman. She was went to live with her uncle, who was a monastic in the desert of Egypt, and she lived as a monastic as well in his cell. I think she was his niece, and then left. She left. She went into the city. Was destitute because she had no support structure. Ended up in a brothel, and so he leaves his cell, goes into the city, goes to the brothel. He like shaves, he like cleans himself up, and then like finds her, and then brings her back to the monastery. Like she feels such repentance that her uncle has left the monastery to come and find her in the state that he finds her, and then she leaves, whatever. Right? It's not saying like don't go because you might be tempted to actually commit something in a brothel. It's saying in the next verse, it says, for if anyone thinks himself to be something when he has nothing, he deceives himself, right? So this is very clearly about like when you correct somebody in gentleness, if you're able to avoid pride because you're nothing, right? Because just because you're correcting somebody doesn't mean that you're actually someone to think highly of yourself. Because again, it's the works of the Spirit through you.
And maybe it's worth saying this out loud too, to Father Nick's kind of pastoral point about like presbyters and sort of their role for people. I mean, like confessors go to confession, right? And like spiritual fathers have spiritual fathers, which I'm not sure if everybody sort of realizes that. Like at least if they're doing their job, right? I mean, like the same person who is hearing the confessions of other people and hopefully offering a good word is in turn taking his sins to somebody and confessing and sort of constantly being mindful of his own sins as well. And I think I'm not, to do one without the other would be spiritual malpractice in its own way, potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this I think even this question of pride, this connects, I think, to something that we talked about. I can't remember when it was, 1, 2, 3 weeks ago. That the Christian is not out there, focusing on the sins of other people or sort of like focusing on just sort of like pushing back. right? I mean, even when we are called for whatever reason, right, depending on our station, to say something, to help restore somebody, like there is that sort of like check, and the quest to speak or the quest to correct, just sort of for its own sake, right, can very well be like a manifestation of our own pride. You know, we can trick ourselves and lie to ourselves in our darkness and say, like, I'm doing this for the sake of the other, but it just becomes kind of the way that we are satisfying our own passions and desires. Especially as we clack on our keyboards or wag our finger at our neighbors or so forth. Like, it's not really for them, it's for us, and it's not a good for us.
And again, you need that level of the Spirit in order to do this, right? It's not everyone. It's those who have the Spirit, you who are spiritual, right? So it's important to see that, like, they're prerequisites. I don't know if that's the right word, right? But there's a level of health that is necessary before you try to heal others.
Yeah.
This is where it gets a little tricky, though, because maybe this is the pride thing. It takes a level of spiritual, it seems very paradoxical, and I'm going to ramble again, but here we go.
Wait, let me see if I can get it before you say that. Sorry, that would be rude.
Presumptuous and rude. It takes a level of spiritual awareness and to see your own spiritual failings. But in your spiritual awareness, you have a better understanding of the fruits of the Spirit, or you live out the fruits of the Spirit more, but it's not from you, it's from God. So there's this weird, I guess, level of how do I
know when I'm qualified to speak?
Right.
That was one sentence.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
If you gotta excuse me for a split second. Sorry.
I feel that the answer to that is, like, oftentimes the impulse to speak should always be checked. Like, if that's the first response, like, that needs to be checked.
Yeah.
You know, the only times I have found, and then again, like, we've been having this conversation about pride, like, not pridefully, but the only time I've ever felt like I've been able to offer guidance or correction when it's been needed and have it heard in a spirit of gentleness have been when, like, speaking was not my first impulse.
Yeah. And maybe to push into
or when I have sat on what I've wanted to say for a very long time until there was enough gentleness in the relationship in order to I have assumed in my pastoral life, I have assumed in at least one occasion that I had a stronger relationship with someone than I did after what was literally 3 years of pastoring someone, visiting them in their home twice a month, every month for 3 years, and thought we got to a point where I could, offer some unsolicited guidance. And we were not there. And it wasn't offered in a spirit of malice, but we just hadn't developed that yet. Yeah. And so I have become very, very cautious about when I offer. And a lot of the times it's always in response. It's not, I don't usually initiate.
Yeah.
I've screwed up a couple of times by initiating.
And I think it was Chrysostom who talks about that too, like why the gentleness is necessary, because if without it, or without the preconditions for that gentleness, like you create it can lead to a certain level of defensiveness that actually like solidifies the person in whatever brokenness they're doing, right? Like I think that's really good advice. I'm thinking also of Father Tom Hopko. I think in one of his maxims says something along the lines of, be something like, I can't remember the precise phrasing, be slow to offer advice, like unless it's your job essentially, or unless it's like the relationship. It's sometimes when we can be too sort of like eager to offer that, and it's not our place, or the relationship isn't there, right? Like that reactive sort of sense, like somebody's coming to me asking for it, as opposed to I'm tapping the stranger, in the cafe on their shoulder to be like, oh, by the way, you don't want to do that anymore. Hi, my name is Steve. Like that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember that maxim off the top of my head, but yeah, like when we are responding to a request, right? That is sort of God putting us in a position. Like that's your responsibility. Like it would be the opposite of gentleness to avoid sort of offering some correction in that moment, right? That's just you avoiding a hard conversation or whatever it is. Like somebody wounded has come to you. But when you pounce on somebody, it's different.
But sometimes we can give advice for the sake of gentle correction, that in the gentle correction is still hurtful, and they don't want to hear it. Does that mean we don't give it?
Speak more about that. What do you mean?
Well, I guess, the idea that, there's sometimes of course, in our roles in ministry or as priests, in two of our, in Father Panagiotis' case and I, but even Steve as someone who works in ministry, but let's specifically talk to us. At some point, there are certain things that we will need to correct or point out or do things that are necessary. I mean, that's part of our position, and it won't be well received. And that's not always our fault, and that's not always our problem. If in our gentleness, we try to reach them the best we can. And sometimes it is our fault. Sometimes we could be better at that, but sometimes it's not.
And St. Paul, I mean, the scriptures tell us, right, that, tell something once and then, twice, and then have nothing to do with that, have nothing to do with that wicked person again, right? Like, and we're not necessarily, the hard part is, I want to say in the same moment, we are not completely responsible for everybody's response, right? Just as freedom allows for people to choose how to respond, we're not totally responsible for that, but we also can't neglect it. That doesn't, right? Just, we don't have the freedom to run around and be like, well, if you don't like it, that's just your problem because, you don't have the disposition to receive. Like that's not right. So we need to present it in a way that it can be heard, but at the same point in time, we're not solely responsible for making these things heard, right? Like this is a really important point for a marriage, because in communication within a marriage, we are responsible for communicating in a way that our spouse can receive. We don't have the freedom to just communicate however we want to communicate and then just expect them to receive it and deal with it, right? Like we have a responsibility to present our comments, our concerns, our criticisms even, right, in a way that our spouse can receive them. That's what is being spoken about here, right? Like I can't guarantee that my spouse will receive them, but I also can't set them up to fail by being like, I'm putting no thought into how I'm going to communicate this message to you just because it's true. Just because it's true doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be said, and doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be said in this way at this moment in time.
Yeah. Like maybe silly little example, right? But there's a moment in the life of Saint Silouan the Athonite when he's a child and he's out, he's cooking for the family, and apparently he makes like venison on a fast day or whatever it is. And he doesn't think of it. He loses track of the days. And months later, when he's out in the fields with his dad comes to him and says, hey, do you remember that time you made stew for us months ago? Just to let you know, it was a fasting day and it tasted like carrion because, we shouldn't have been eating it on that day. And he gave him months. Like he didn't sort of like make him feel bad in the moment. He just sort of like, I don't know whether that's overdoing it or not, but like even Saint Silouan in his life presents it as, or Saint Sophrony presents it as this example of even being mindful of the time to sort of like try to reduce that sting so that the correction can be offered at a point where somebody is going to be more likely to receive it. And that's just kind of, I think, maybe an extreme example or a very deep example of compassion with it, but it's something to kind of like hold in that tension. He waited months to say, by the way, shouldn't have made that for us.
And I think there's something that we're going over time, but what's important to notice about correction is that, just what Steve pointed out, right? It's to restore somebody. It's not actually to change past behavior or to ridicule past behavior, but it is to guide and direct future behavior, future actions, future disposition, right? So when you correct somebody, the only point of mentioning the past is, in fact, to give a concrete example of what happened with the purpose of changing that in the future, right? And so you see all these models in like communication workshops and things like that. It's like, when you do X, this happens. In the future, do Y, right? Because it's not about making you feel bad for, like, if you're not actually providing the restoration and the path forward, but you're just criticizing the past, you're not actually fulfilling the call to restore. You're just browbeating, shaming, right? Like that's the point, is like, if you don't provide the healing or the path towards healing, then you're not actually doing this. Which is why, like, this, when we're talking about a spirit of gentleness and not being like, there's a lot that goes into correcting someone, and correcting someone in a way that they will be corrected. And for the majority of us, thinking about offering correction does not take in real time the amount of effort, time, and consideration that St. Paul is telling us it needs to, right? Like, before we even think about correcting, we need to make sure that we are bearing the fruits of the Spirit, which means that we have crucified the flesh, right? Like, we can't even begin to start correcting if we are still wallowing in the flesh. And then we need to make sure that we do it without pride. We need to make sure that we do it in a spirit of gentleness so they can be received. Like, there's so much going on here, that to Father Nick, your point, and Steve, your point, like, sometimes, yes, there is a very real need to address something right here, right now, because this needs to change. But man, if I'm not the right person to do that, or I can't do that without being tempted and to fall into sin, like, it might be better for me not to, in all honesty. I might reinforce the sinful behavior I'm trying to change in someone else by not presenting it in a spirit of gentleness, or by being viewed as a hypocrite, right? If I'm a hypocrite because I'm still succumbing to the passions of the flesh and I'm correcting you about your passions, like, I'm gonna, right? And so there's so much that needs to happen first. And that's why I kind of said, like, more often than not, we need to just cultivate the Spirit in our heart and allow that cultivation to be a witness to health, to be a witness to the Spirit, to be a witness to the crucifixion of the flesh, more so than actively going out and, like, telling everybody that they're wrong. Because everybody's wrong. Like, that's the thing. Guess what? Everyone's wrong. Sorry, such a grim view on humanity. Everyone's wrong.
It's true. It's true.
It's true. But you know what?
That's the whole point.
There's no. There's not like a moral. Like, I'm not like casting everyone off and saying, like, God, you're all terrible. But everybody's wrong.
Well, it's kind of the point of this, right? I mean, we, in our fleshliness that we met, and this is kind of a wrap up, I think.
Yeah, please.
Unless I'm way off on this. In our fleshliness, we are wrong. We are these things. In our Spirit-given fruit, we find Christ's light and are corrected. And that's the reality of it. By ourselves, in our own works, it's just we're wrong. So it's not us anyways.
Yep. Cool. That was very succinct, Father. I appreciate that. Way to bring it home.
Here pondering it for like the last 15 minutes. All right. Prayer time?
Prayer time.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and forever, to the ages of ages. Amen. Christ our God. Amen. Illumine your light in our hearts that we may present ourselves to you, that you may shine on us, exposing our weaknesses, but that you give us the fruits of the Spirit as St. Paul lays out before us. Open our hearts and minds that we may grow in these areas and bring us back to you in every way. For you are holy always, now and forever, to the ages of ages.
Amen.
3 Men and a Bible, exploring the Sunday Scriptures. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.